Japan entered the 1920s with great ambition. Embracing European technology and European flair, Japan embarked on a new challenge, competing against European powers and even overtaking them. In full industrial and economic expansion, its dynamism was attractive, and 1,000 Westerners settled there. Among them, a French family, Emmy and Jean Millot. They would spend over 20 years in Japan. Emmy, Jean, and their journalist friend Robert Guillain would witness these troubled times, marked by the country's militarization, their invasion of Asia, and the defeat of 1945. Illustrated by personal archives and photographs, their story provides unprecedented insight into a country at war. Tokyo, February 1927. Emperor Taisho had just passed away. His son Hirohito had assumed the throne. He was only 25 years of age. Hirohito's tour of Europe at the age of 20 had left a lasting impression on him. He'd witnessed firsthand the devastation caused by World War I. As a sign of his pacifist convictions, he chose the name of Showa, enlightened peace, for this new imperial era. Emperor Hirohito was the head of state as well as the head of the Shinto religion. He lived at the Imperial Palace, a symbol of political and religious power. Tokyo, the capital, embodied the nation's aspirations for modernity. Tokyoites adopted Western clothing and frequented movie theaters as well as concert halls. And the public transport system grew at a rapid pace. Inaugurated in 1927, Tokyo's first subway line proved to be hugely popular. To sustain its dynamic economy, Japan welcomed more and more Westerners, encouraging their investment and embracing their technology. Jean Millot, a young engineer, had recently arrived in the archipelago. Commissioned by a French company, he established a telegraph link between Japan and France. His business thrived. Jean embraced the language and worked with Japanese teams at the communications center in Tomioka. With his Leica in hand, he explored the country and photographed famous landmarks, landscapes, and temples. The pictures he sent home to his parents in France were not cliched tourist snaps.
The peasants wear coats made out of straw from their harvested rice fields. These straw coats are designed to protect them from the rain.
As Jean absorbed the culture, he shared with them his newfound knowledge. In Tokyo, Jean attended the high society receptions hosted by the Japanese for the Westerners. On these occasions, he met businessmen and diplomats, expats like him from Western empires, looking for opportunities to settle in Asia. Everyone would meet up in the private rooms of the Imperial Hotel, a short walk from Parliament and the Emperor's Palace. On a reporting trip for Le Petit Parisien newspaper, French journalist André Violis described it thus:
"It's the most incredible hotel in the world, and the rendezvous for the Tokyo elite. Representatives of various embassies, together with the European colony's beautiful people and bright young things, savor cocktails while exchanging gossip and witticisms."
At one of these elite events, Jean Millot met Emmy Imura. Aged 26, this elegant young woman had just separated from Dr. Chutaro Imura, a Japanese psychiatrist. Emmy had met and married Chutaro in Europe when barely out of her teens and followed him to Japan. But when Chutaro took over the family clinic in Tokyo, he was obliged to comply with the traditional system. Emmy then realized that in Japan, men behaved as masters and their wives were regarded as mere servants.
Only one thing was expected of me, and that was obedience. I had to live according to my mother-in-law's rules, as a submissive and self-sacrificing wife. It rapidly became unbearable.
Emmy left Chutaro and moved to Tokyo on her own. Her aspiration for independence echoed that of Japanese feminists who were demanding the right to vote and equality with men. Young Japanese women studied at university and were allowed to work outside the home. As in Europe, these flappers, or modern girls, favored short, boyish haircuts, smoked, and asserted their independence. Emmy mixed with these liberated Japanese women and made friends.
I lent Makiko my Western clothes, and in return, she taught me how to wear a kimono. It's a long and complicated process. You need help to get dressed.
Emmy lived freely and to the full. Her joie de vivre rubbed off on the expats around her. Jean was enchanted by this vivacious nonconformist, while Jean's optimistic outlook and sense of humor charmed Emmy, who was introduced to her future in-laws via Jean's pictures.
Emmy is a Japanese woman. Shot in broad daylight, this picture makes her hair seem blonde, but it's actually auburn. Distinctive feature, she reaches her fiancé's earlobe.
Jean and Emmy settled in the chic foreigners' quarter. They were invited to garden parties at the French embassy and also to the Wednesday lunches, along with their compatriots. Their journalist friend Robert Guillain described these occasions.
From the embassy's number 2 man down to the hair salon owner and an ancient missionary, 30-odd French residents would gather around a huge table for tasty and good-humored meals.
Jean was a very popular guest.
A beaming face, a lively and optimistic conversationalist, very early on I considered him to be among the most likable.
In the late 1920s, Emmy gave birth to 2 sons, Louis, then Mark. The boys spent their childhood years in Tokyo, Hakone, at the foot of Mount Fuji, and Karuizawa, which had been popular with Westerners since the late 19th century. Emmy wrote to her family.
I love living here. Life is sweet and the scenery wonderful. We have many friends, both European and Japanese, and our boys feel at home.
But the peace and tranquility conveyed in these family photos masked the reality. Japan was a nation in political turmoil. Since the early 20th century, there had been major advances along the road to democracy. Communist ideas spread. Workers and farmers organized into labor unions. In 1925, Parliament was elected by direct male suffrage. All males over the age of 25 were now eligible to vote. But behind this apparent openness, brutal oppression loomed as an internal security law was adopted, aiming to silence the regime's opponents and Japan's anti-capitalists. 3 years later, on March the 15th, 1928, the political police swung into action. Following the election of the first socialist representatives, 1,600 actual and alleged communists were arrested, and labor unions disbanded. The young communist writer Kobayashi Takiji condemned the police's brutality in a book. Following its publication, Kobayashi was thrown in jail and tortured to death during interrogation. His works remained banned until the end of the war. Public distrust of the government grew with the Great Depression, which swept Japan in the spring of 1930, 6 months after the Wall Street crash. Some 2 million Japanese found themselves out of work. The government was incapable of turning back the rising tide of poverty. Farmers could no longer supplement their income by breeding silkworms, as the prices had collapsed. In the mountains of Nagano, impoverished families sold their young daughters to tea houses, where they were employed as waitresses and geishas. The army was a way out of poverty for many Japanese. It provided destitute growers with regular pay and 2 meals a day. Hundreds of thousands of farmers enlisted. With the influx of new recruits, the army became a dominant force. To combat the poverty and unemployment in Japan, the military decided to take over new territories and resources in Asia, Taiwan and Korea having been Japanese colonies since 1910. Their aim was to expand the colonial empire by taking on the Western powers present in the region. In 1930, the army plunged Japan into a war that would last 15 years. First target, China, torn apart by civil war and occupied by several Western nations. In September 1931, the Land Army invaded Manchuria in the north of the country. 6 months later, it controlled this region twice the size of Japan. The Japanese created the puppet state of Manchukuo here and chose the last Chinese emperor, Puyi, as its leader. Puyi took his orders from the occupying army. André Violis, Le Petit Parisien journalist, described this occupation.
The army controls every department: Manchukuo's troops, finances, and police force. It's permeated everything. Every day it brings more of its people here to extend its authority. Manchuria is its fiefdom. They now have a firm hand on it and will never let go.
The army exploited the region's resources. Manchuria provided 1/3 of Japan's iron ore needs and became the world's leading soybean producer. A godsend, which the central government in Tokyo saw as a way out of the economic crisis. It then launched a program of mass colonization. 1 million Japanese settled here. The Western powers, who did not react when Japan invaded Manchuria, grew concerned. They feared Japan's expansionism would jeopardize their positions in China. A new stage was reached in March 1932, when the Japanese Navy decided to attack Shanghai and its western concessions without consulting their government. Here is André Violis's first-hand account.
I was there. For over a month, I witnessed the violent and bloody street fighting and fires, and I heard and suffered the bombing and air raids. "60 years ago, Japan was a small, obscure kingdom in Asia. It now dominates the Far East, where it's established its hegemony through a series of victorious wars."
Thousands were killed in the foreign concessions. Directly hit this time around, the Western powers negotiated a ceasefire. The British, Americans, French, Italians, and Germans found their positions in China undermined. To curb Japan's expansionism, they backed Chiang Kai-shek, who condemned the invasion of Manchukuo at the League of Nations Assembly. The nationalist Chinese president demanded the immediate withdrawal of the Japanese and that a commission of inquiry be established. In March 1933, the League of Nations declared the invasion illegal.
The chairman announces the result of the ballot. 42 nations out of the 44 present condemned Japan's Manchurian policy.
Le rapport est adopté à l'unanimité. Japan, however, finds it impossible to accept the report adopted by the Assembly.
In response, the Japanese stormed out of the League of Nations. Having chosen international isolation, Japan now had a free hand to pursue its invasions in Asia. In Tokyo, ultra-nationalist military officers decided to impose their will through violence. They assassinated business leaders, politicians, and even the Prime Minister. The army was fast becoming a state within the state. Terror swept the country. Jean and Emmy were well aware that the Japan where they had made their lives for 10 years was changing radically. And Jean witnessed it directly. He was in the Havas Agency's offices on February 26, 1936, when the ultra-nationalist officers carried out a coup d'etat and took control of the city centre. Jean managed to get the news to Paris.
1,500 officers and simple soldiers are occupying strategic locations. Parliament, the War Ministry, police headquarters. They have wrested control of the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of Justice. The Prime Minister had a narrow escape.
The rebels wanted to set up a military regime with the emperor as supreme leader. But Emperor Hirohito objected. Troops were mobilized without our orders. No matter what they are called, they are no longer our troops. Martial law was declared on February 28th, and orders were given to suppress the uprising. 15 officers were executed. But despite all this, the ultra-nationalists got what they wanted. The new Prime Minister, Prince Konoe, increased the armed forces budget and supported their imperial ambitions. Jean followed the events with interest and discussed them with his journalist friends. They thought that the ultranationalists were fascinated by Hitler and that the Führer's influence was growing. Worried about the turn of political events, Emmy felt the need to get away from the rising tension. She decided to spend a few weeks in Manchukuo.
Dear Jean, I'm on the boat and my journey is going as planned. I'm meeting up with my friends in Harbin. Take good care of the children. You can write to me at the Hôtel Moderne.
The Japanese army had turned Harbin into a tourist destination. The city was popular with wealthy foreigners who went there to have fun. Emmy spent time with jazz musicians and partied till dawn. The invasion of China and its capital Nanking became the Imperial Japanese Army's new goal. In July 1937, Peking fell in a matter of days, followed by Shanghai a few weeks later. After several months of fierce fighting, the Japanese entered Nanjing, the capital of Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalists. Cut off from supplies, the army looted and burned its way through Nanjing and went on a killing spree, massacring the Chinese population. The Japanese High Command turned a blind eye. The soldiers bayoneted civilians, committed mass rape. Children were not spared. In the space of just 3 months, some 200,000 citizens were killed. While the international community expressed outrage on discovering the testimonies and pictures revealed by Life magazine, the Japanese government censored the news. The Japanese public was kept in the dark until the end of the war about the atrocities committed during the sacking of Nanjing. Japanese propaganda presented the victory over China as a return to peace and claimed to have liberated its people. The Asahi Shimbun newspaper's correspondent went one further. What a wonderful reward for our fighting to control the enemy's capital and to have gained the upper hand over the whole of China. We have laid the foundations for economic prosperity in East Asia. In Tokyo, the government mobilized the population. Fundraisers were held for the Imperial Army. Jean Millot described this popular support.
To help the war effort, the citizens go to collection points and hand over money, saucepans, and valuable jewelry, which is then used to make cannons.
The press and the radio were hit by censorship. Journalists were prohibited from criticizing the imperial ideology. All Japanese citizens were expected to rally around the government. The traditional system, which Emmy had escaped by leaving Chutaro, once more became the model to follow. Once considered a sign of modernity, the Western way of life was now frowned upon. In these turbulent times, the question of returning to Europe arose. But the family did not hesitate for long.
Jean's business is here, as are all of our friends. The children speak Japanese, English, and a little French with their father. Their upbringing may be cosmopolitan, but their country is Japan, as it is ours. Besides, the situation in Europe is no better than here.
On September 1st, 1939, the Third Reich invaded Poland. World War II was underway. For the Japanese, this was a strategic turnaround because the West's presence in Asia was weakened as a result. France mobilized all of its citizens, including those living abroad. In Tokyo, Jean was told to report to the French military attaché, Commander Thibault. He was sent to Yokohama, where he had to make himself available to the consul Arsène Henry. And then, nothing. Back in Europe, the phony war had begun. In Japan's French community, according to Robert Guillain, it was all a bit of a farce.
One fine day, a telegram arrived from the military authorities in Paris. Send us a report on the activities of your civilian intelligence service. This was terribly awkward for Commander Thibault, as no such service existed. All right, thought Thibault, since we don't have one, let's set one up. In the utmost secrecy, he called together 15 or so Frenchmen. A head had to be appointed, and Jean Millot was chosen. But Emmy told the secret to her friend Anne-Françoise, wife of Reuters correspondent Jimmy Cox, who told another French resident. Thibault was informed, and good old Millot lost his secret position the very same day.
But these incidents did not escape the notice of the Japanese Secret Service, which kept a close eye on all foreigners and recorded their conversations in detailed reports.
Meeting at the Wednesday lunch, as usual, were François Chevalier and Robert Guillain of the Havas Agency, Jean Millot of the French Telegraph Company. They discussed their new car
In May 1940, the troops of Nazi Germany entered France after invading Belgium and the Netherlands. Jean was enlisted in the Colonial Telegraph Battalion and sent to Indochina. On June 24, 1940, when Jean landed in Haiphong, France was already beaten. 2 days earlier, it had signed the armistice with the Reich. The Third Republic was in its final days and would soon be replaced by the Vichy regime. Taking advantage of France's vulnerable position, the Japanese government issued an ultimatum to Paris. Open the doors of northern Indochina to the Japanese army immediately and admit a military mission as well as troops. We demand that France cease forwarding arms and fuel to Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalists. Governor-General Catrou had no choice but to comply. The French colony did not even have a tank with which to defend itself. Appointed by the Vichy government, his successor, Admiral Decoux, pursued the same policy. On June 29th, a Japanese inspection mission arrived in Hanoi to ensure the embargo on supplies to China was respected. The same day, Jean Millot attended a dinner with the head of the Japanese delegation, General Nishihara, and Commander Thibault, the military attaché he knew so well. Jean, who spoke fluent Japanese, was taken on by the mission as an interpreter and liaison officer. He then spent 2 months traveling all over Kaobang with a group of Japanese officers as they inspected railways, bridges, and border posts. Jean's pictures give us a good idea of his mission.
August 1940. Here's a bit of war booty that Chiang Kai-shek won't be getting. Between Kaobang and Trucan Phu, we found hundreds of oil drums.
But the mission was not simply checking nothing was being forwarded to China. It was also gathering intelligence. Admiral Decoux voiced his concerns to Vichy. The Japanese military spend their time trying to gather information of all kinds on the areas they visit. They evidently have other objectives. The Admiral guessed right. The Japanese army wanted to establish a foothold in Indochina. Japan needed the resources exploited by the Western colonies in Asia. Indochina's rice and rubber, the oil of the Dutch colonies of Sumatra and Borneo, the British possessions of Hong Kong and Singapore, the American Philippines' iron ore and sugar. To justify Japan's expansionism, its Minister of Foreign Affairs, Matsuoka, announced the creation of a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere on the 1st of August, 1940. On the Indo-Chinese border, Jean discovered that the Japanese troops stationed in China were gearing up to enter the French colony. His pictures and their captions convey this moment of extreme tension.
The Japanese troops only have to cross this bridge to invade Indochina and are just waiting for the signal from their commanders.
On September 22nd, Japanese diplomats forced the French to authorize the stationing of 6,000 troops north of Indochina. The following day, the Japanese infantry crossed the border, but the French troops, who had not been informed of the decision, tried to repel the invasion. After 3 days of fighting, the Japanese took control of the northern border posts. Jean witnessed the event, an Asian nation taking over a Western colonial possession. Consolidating its position of strength, Japan signed the Tripartite Pact a few days later with the Third Reich and Mussolini's Italy. Tokyo thus secured its dominance in Asia and the Pacific. Then, on July 29, 1941, the Japanese finalized their takeover of Indochina and imposed 40,000 soldiers on the French. In less than a year, the French colonial power had caved into Japan's imperial ambitions. And Indochina became a springboard for Japan's invasion of the Pacific. Threatened, the United States declared an embargo on oil exports to Japan in order to force Tokyo to come to the table. But the Japanese stalled negotiations and prepared their attack. War against the United States became inevitable. By autumn 1941, Jean Millot was back in Tokyo. Everyday life was hard. Due to severe shortages, rice, miso, sugar, and coal were rationed. Jean and Emmy decided that Emmy should take the children to live in their holiday home in Karuizawa, some 100 kilometers from the capital. Foreigners, allies, and enemies alike were suspected of espionage. In December 1941, a dozen Frenchmen were detained without proof. Like all foreigners, Emmy now lived in fear. In the summer of 1940, held at the military police station, Jimmy Cox, the Reuters correspondent and husband of her friend Anne-Françoise, jumped to his death from a window during an interrogation. His friends and family were convinced he had been thrown. As Emmy told Jean,
Anne-Françoise feared for her life. She took refuge at the British consulate. I went to her house to pick up her clothes and important documents. She was repatriated to London 2 days later.
Japanese citizens were under surveillance too. Democratic institutions were dismantled. Konoe's government created a single party, a powerful propaganda machine. Its doctrine? To worship the emperor and serve him loyally night and day, each in his place. Neighborhood associations and committees maintained social order by spying on each and every citizen and reporting all those who spoke out against the war. The military were everywhere and even interfered in the curriculum, which now had to teach children to die bravely in the war and appreciate the beauty of death. Motivated by the propaganda, the entire nation rallied to war. Separated from Emmy and the boys, Jean felt terribly lonely. Gone was the sociable, cheerful, eternal optimist Robert Guillain had known before the war.
Millot spent a lot of time at home alone, rarely went out, and read a great deal. I occasionally met him at classical concerts.
To forget their hunger and anguish, the residents of Tokyo regularly visited cultural venues. Jean would sometimes meet up with Robert.
On Friday evenings, at Hibiya Concert Hall, we'd listen to Beethoven, Debussy, as well as Stravinsky, trying to forget about the war.
On the morning of December 8, 1941, the Japanese learned on the radio and in the press of the surprise attack on the American base of Pearl Harbor. Jean described the population's reaction.
Among the crowds of people rushing to work, a newspaper vendor held out his special edition, Senso, Senso, War, War. The people seemed indifferent, but I know them well. They were actually stupefied and dismayed.
The Imperial Army gambled on a swift victory. And in the months that followed, the Japanese won battle after battle. In no time, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines and Malaysia fell to the Japanese troops. Thrilled by these conquests, the people went to salute their emperor. Robert Guillain watched the processions.
In Tokyo, people head in droves to the Imperial Palace, one by one, in groups. As families, in processions, the men dressed in military-style khaki, the women in colorful kimonos, and hundreds of children come to bow before the moats of the palace.
Heady with success, the Japanese officers were convinced the Americans would rush to the negotiating table. But the Imperial Army's defeat at Midway on June the 10th, 1942, just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, signaled the end of Japan's supremacy in the Pacific. The troops then suffered defeat after defeat. General Tojo, the charismatic prime minister of wartime Japan, forcibly conscripted students for the final assault. The military high command invented a new weapon, the kamikaze suicide pilot. Young students, the nation's elite and lifeblood, were sent to their death in the emperor's name. But the kamikaze proved no match for American military might. From November 1944, the US Air Force heavily bombed Tokyo and its working-class neighborhoods. One February night, Jean Millot and Robert Guillain witnessed an air raid.
In a single night, 700,000 bombs rained down on thousands of wooden houses and buildings, home to a dense population of ordinary folk with meager means.
Then, on the night of March the 9th, 1945, the US Air Force showered incendiary bombs on the Japanese capital, causing colossal damage. After Tokyo, the Americans destroyed and incinerated Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya with napalm. Emperor Hirohito came out of his palace and took in the destruction of his capital. He could have stopped the war at this point. But he let the military fight until the bitter end. The day after the US attack on Tokyo, the authorities evacuated all foreign residents from the capital, officially to protect them, but in reality, to ensure they did not inform their governments of the extent of the bombing. With his compatriots, Jean Millot was moved to Karuizawa. The Japanese authorities brought the nationals of neutral countries here, as well as those of other Axis powers. Karuizawa became home to Swiss, Italians, and Germans, but their freedom was severely restricted. Robert Guillain lived there too.
The village is swarming with plainclothes police officers and police spies. Their main job is to keep the many different nationalities apart, as they're not allowed to communicate with each other.
Jean found his holiday home empty. His marriage had not survived the long separation. Emmy had moved to another neighborhood with the children. Life was hard for everyone in Karuizawa.
We are not allowed to leave the village. Our daily food ration consists of a small square of black bread and a bit of soy porridge.
Little by little, Emmy sold off all her jewelry in exchange for food.
I have no choice but to purchase everything we eat on the black market, which the Japanese profiteers have organized with the police's help.
In addition to hunger, another threat soon reared its head. At the Swiss embassy, a radio picked up the American news. US troops had landed in Okinawa and were preparing for the final assault. Fear gripped the summer resort. Would the inhabitants be massacred by their Japanese guards or bombed by the Americans? The Swiss ambassador voiced these fears. I would appreciate it if we could try to ensure the immunity of the village of Karuizawa. With the escalation of the bombing of Japan, it is possible that Karuizawa will be bombed if we do not approach Washington. In the end, Karuizawa was spared. The Europeans followed with great concern the final weeks of the war. On July 27, 1945, at the Potsdam Conference, the Allied powers called for the unconditional surrender of all Japanese forces, but gave no guarantee that the imperial system would be preserved. The Japanese government ignored the Allies' demands. The emperor said nothing. The United States decided to show the world their new power, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped a uranium bomb on Hiroshima, and on August 9th, a plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. Towns and cities were wiped out. Men, women and children died in their tens of thousands. Jean was devastated. He stuck newspaper pictures of the destruction of Hiroshima in his photo albums. For his friend Robert Guillain too, a line had been crossed. Robert wrote,
"With the Hiroshima bomb, the atrocity of war has reached new heights. There has been a shift in this collective crime that is war. Humankind has entered the era of mass murder. Military plans now involve the destruction of millions of lives. The hell of Hiroshima will be even more abominable for future generations because the human race can be contaminated by the nuclear fallout."
On August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered unconditionally. General MacArthur's 8th Army took over the country. In no time, the Japanese saw the Americans as liberators. It was the start of a new era, an age of democracy and pacifism. A communications expert, Jean headed up a strategic department, the 8th Army's Telecommunication Bureau. His two sons, Louis and Mark, 16 and 15, who spoke 3 languages, were hired as interpreters by the Americans. A democratization program was implemented, and the country's first multi-party elections since the end of the war were held in April 1946. The age of majority was lowered to 20, and women voted for the first time. The Japanese were divided over the emperor's future. Some demanded he be tried as a war criminal. Many called for his abdication. But General MacArthur decided he needed the imperial system to achieve his objectives. Hirohito is a symbol which unites all Japanese. Destroy him, and the nation will disintegrate. Under the Americans' control, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East convened in Tokyo on May 3, 1946. Lasting 2 years, the Tokyo trial made the Japanese public aware of the war crimes committed by the Imperial Army. The looting and pillaging in Manchuria, the Nanking Massacre, the execution of civilians. The militarists were held responsible for all of these acts of violence. The emperor was absent. He would not be tried for his role as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. A demobilized soldier wrote in his diary, "A huge number of human lives have been sacrificed in the emperor's name. I hate to say this, but he, more than anyone else, must be held responsible, given that he is the head of state." The Millots did not get to see this Japan that put its past behind it and failed to deal with the ghosts of the war. The family scattered. Louis moved to Paris and became an architect. Mark pursued his career in the US Army. An intelligence officer, he was trained in Japan for the Korean War, then settled in the United States. Jean Millot moved to Geneva to work at the International Telecommunication Union and raised a new family there. In love with a Japanese man, Emmy stayed in Japan until 1952, then settled in Brighton. The family rarely saw each other again and never spoke of how the years of happiness and turmoil had affected them. Based in Japan, Robert Guillain expressed the feelings of this people he knew so well.
We Japanese smile because we are hurting. For us, a smile is not always synonymous with pleasure. A wound, a failure also require a smile. It is our politeness towards fate and our revenge because we make adversity lose face as well. There are millions of smiles on Japanese faces today because, in Japan, there are millions of wounded hearts.